It is such a pleasure to be here to present the Knight Innovation Award to Neil deGrasse Tyson, who as an astrophysicist and director of the Hayden Planetarium has just done an amazing job bringing science and making science accessible to the people, and that's why we are honoring him tonight. He is the person who Rolling Stone described just a few weeks ago as the person who wants to turn us all into science geeks, and that's okay. That's perfectly okay. And everyone here will be thrilled to know that on October 25th, National Geographic will continue Star Talk, and once again, Mr. Tyson will bring celebrities, including Bill Clinton and others, to again help us all understand why science works and why it's important. I am thrilled to introduce Mr. Tyson.
When I was given that task, I said, wow, that's kind of audacious. Just pluck someone from the podcast universe and hand them $25,000. And I said, I don't even want that responsibility. So what I did was I said, here's somebody I know, all right? You decide if this person has met these thresholds. Because I'm not gonna do it. You decide. There it is. And they decided. And they said, yep, she meets these thresholds. Mightily. And so I am proud to introduce to you the recipient of this Pass Forward Award that I've been charged to give to Cara Santamaria, who is a neuroscientist, podcaster, television host. Come on up, you can meet her, all right? So, if you just Google Cara, that's enough to get you no end of podcast videos, skeptics, broadcasts, things. She is a clear thinking podcast. She's a person who in another era would have had no real outlet except for an occasional op-ed. But now, with the emergent social media, audio, video media, she has basically taken over. So I invite you to find her on the internet. And does she get to say something now? Okay, yeah, yes. I can give her. So I present to you Cara Santamaria. Yes. Oh, by the way, we've had her on Star Talk like 3 or 4 times, just to comment. A fascinating subject is the human mind and how it can do the right things or the wrong things or weird things. And she's been our go-to person on multiple occasions to comment, because she studied neuroscience and then became a journalist after that. So she knows how to think about the problem and communicate the problem. And Cara, congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah. You're right.
Yeah, I'm double mic here. I want to thank the J School. I want to thank the Knight Foundation. I spent a little bit of time at CUNY myself, actually. I did my undergrad and my master's down in Texas where I grew up, but I started a PhD at the Graduate Center. I was at the Queens College campus teaching classes and doing research in a neuropsychology lab there for a year before I became a PhD dropout and pursued journalism and media and science communication full time. I want to thank you guys for this opportunity. I've learned a lot listening to the podcast panel, listening to the conversation with Neil. I am always really interested in certain topics that were discussed there because my background is both science and journalism. I split my time and kind of try to live in both camps, which can be trying. So I work for a local television show, public television show in Los Angeles called SoCal Connected on our public television channel KCET. It's an award-winning show. It's very pure journalism at its core with very little funding. And that's the show that I sort of try to keep my chops going on. And then on the flip side, I do my podcast, Talk Nerdy, and I also co-host now the Skeptic's Guide to the Universe podcast, which is a popular science podcast and skeptical kind of advocacy podcast. And in those arenas, I actually do what I call science communication, what a lot of people would call science communication, which is very different from journalism. And I think that that's a topic that's important to explore, is the difference between advocacy and between educating in the sciences and doing pure journalism, which is in service to the public. And I think a lot of scientists and science advocates and science communicators also really truly believe, and I think that we are correct in believing, that what we do is a service to the public. I think the main difference is that many science communicators also feel like they are in service to the scientists, whereas journalists feel that scientists are not there to be friends, but they are there to really truly try and understand what happens behind the scenes and ensure that the public understands that. So there is sometimes some tension between the two camps. I think it's an important thing to not ignore that these are two different things and to try and understand them. I think same goes with podcasting. It was interesting to hear on the panel everybody talking about podcasting as a new journalistic medium, but podcasting is not necessarily journalism. In many cases, it is not. I think that there is room for journalism in podcasting, but I think that it's also very important for us to be true, just like we want to maintain an honest difference between science and pseudoscience in the public consciousness, and that's what we're all kind of collectively working to do, is improve science literacy. I think it's also important to maintain an understanding of the difference between journalism and pseudo-journalism and make sure that the public understands the difference between that as well. So I'm honored to have been paid forward, I think given forward this award from Neil. It's a huge honor, and I don't take it lightly. And I hope to be able to be in service to the public and do my part in that. Yeah.
Thank you. And Cara, correct me if I'm wrong, most people who know of you is through your Talk Nerdy to Me podcast.
Probably. So I actually did a series at the Huffington Post. I started my journalism career at the Huffington Post, which is
Okay.
interesting. But you know what? I worked there. Ariana reached out to me and asked me to help her build a science page. Prior to working at the Huffington Post, science was not their strong suit. And so it was important to build up a science page where we could have legitimate science journalism occurring outside of the walls of maybe some of the health pages and the environment pages where you may hear more activism than journalism. And so there I did a series called Talk Nerdy to Me. Once I left the Huffington Post, I decided it's probably best when you're working with somebody like Ariana Huffington to not get any sort of legal battles over titles or anything like that. So I spun out and I started a podcast. It's now called Talk Nerdy. I dropped the to me. Tricky. For me, my podcast actually came, short story, just because I know everybody's getting antsy, but a lot of people were talking about how they came into podcasting on the panel. I work in television almost full-time. I'm a freelancer. I'm very lucky to be a freelancer and to pick and choose the jobs that I do. But the majority of my income comes from my work in television, both in journalism and edutainment, as it's often called, in kind of this nonfiction or reality programming arena. I also do some new media work. And then the podcast is supplemental to my income. When I when I was working in television, I've had the opportunity, like many people have, many of you journalists have had the opportunity to be on assignment that you really loved and you thrived in, and on assignment that you had to struggle through and finish. And I did one daily live show, which was a big struggle for me for many reasons. I learned an awful lot, and there were some wonderful people there. And I also worked with some individuals that made my experience quite trying, namely an executive producer who was not very accommodating to women. And during the course of working on that show, I started to flounder a little bit, and I was losing a bit of a sense of self and a bit of a confidence that I think I had gone into it with. I was a kind of regular guest. I had been on Star Talk at this point a couple of times, I think, and I was a regular guest on Joe Rogan's podcast, which is a very popular podcast. And he said on air, you should do this. Like, you'd be good at it. You should try it. And then he kind of asked his listeners, you should tell her to try it. And of course, when Joe Rogan on air says, tweet to Cara, you get like thousands of tweets after that. And I really thought about it and just did it. And podcasting can be quite easy if you go about it a certain way in terms of you don't need terribly expensive equipment, and anybody can have an RSS feed for free, and anybody can enroll in iTunes for free. And so I just kind of did it with no producers and no help, and figured out how to edit it on my own. But I'll tell you that for me, podcasting was my saving grace, because the sense of kind of confidence and self, the ability to just talk about the things that matter to me, which are science and skepticism and atheism and civil rights and civil liberties. I just talked about those things, and I had people on the podcast that were experts in those areas, and I started to regain some of the things that I had lost on this TV show that took up a lot of time. And it really, I think, set a trajectory for my career back in television. And it has become a cornerstone of my sort of brand. I hate using that term, but of who I am, my public face, which is also very personal and private. Also, depression and mental illness is a big topic that I talk about and advocate for, erasing the stigma there. And so for me, podcasting is more than just a job, and it's more than just a journalistic outlet, but it gives me back something just as much as the work that I put into it. And I find that is a really important aspect of the self-expression that can come with podcasting. Podcasting is like blogging, right? Blogs are to kind of print journalism, I think, as podcasting is to legacy radio. And I think that even if nobody's listening, it's a really great thing to take on. And I would definitely encourage everybody in the room, if you've been thinking about doing it, just do it. And the great news, this is the little secret. At the beginning, nobody will be listening, so you can fuck up all you want, and it won't matter. And it's a learning experience, and you get to learn with your listeners. And so I've been very grateful to the listeners for helping me.
Thank you, Cara. Thank you.